What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a fun spin on all the goings-on in the world, though maybe not so fun this week. My name is, of course, as always, Jacob Paveo, and I come to you from the Great White North each and every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is my third attempt to record because I keep screwing it up. That's what happens when you take a week off. Last week was, of course, Canada Day, and I also had an exam to write the day before Canada Day, so it was a very busy week for me, and the podcast was really just not an option. Anyways, the big news around Canada Day is, of course, the Indigenous schools. So that is what we're going to be talking about this week. If it's your first time here, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for checking it out. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Let your friends know about it. If it's not your first time here, welcome back. We are going to have a very complicated discussion here today, so sit tight. You guys know exactly where you are. If you're coming back, you know exactly what you're in for. Strap in those seatbelts because it's time to get real. This is the Laugh to Learn podcast. Hey, check it out! It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. I did call them Indigenous schools in the intro instead of residential schools. That's what happens when you don't use a script and you start talking on the mic, ladies and gentlemen. So I always recommend a script. Either way, let's get to it. So I'm going to start by actually assuming that everyone listening already knows what's going on. And the reason I'm doing that is because just in doing research for this episode, which honestly, I'll be straight up, I didn't have to do a lot. This is a topic that I've been discussing for years and years and years, and I'm going to start by saying I have no idea why this is surprising to anyone, and I've been saying this to every single person who brings it up, and so far, I haven't met a single person in real life outside of the internet who is also not surprised that this comes up and people seem to act like they didn't know about this. And we're going to get to that. Actually, let's start with that first. So I decided to do some reading around the world. Now, of course, the 10-second breakdown, if you don't know what this is about, I encourage you to go literally to any news source and just search for Canadian residential schools, and you will get the complete history on it. If you grew up in Canada, I'm going to let you know this, that in grades 3, 4, 6, and 9, you covered residential schools in school. At least Catholic school did. I can't speak to public school because I didn't go there. And they're very openly honest about it. The Catholic schools teach this completely honestly, that we stole children. They were killed in our custody. We stole their land. We used laws that the Indigenous, at the time we were calling them Aboriginal when I was in school, that the Aboriginal population didn't understand the code of laws we were making them agree to. They thought we were sharing in the land equally. We basically lied to steal all this land. Like, it is not sugar-coated in school. And so, the residential schools, of course, I promised you a 15-second breakdown. Essentially, the Canadian government, run by the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, aligned with the Roman Catholic Church to essentially get rid of the native population here in Canada. The Indigenous population is what we are referring to them as now. And we essentially did very well. They did very well in doing so because they were stealing the children and putting them in what were referred to as residential schools, all driven by the Indian Act of which actually was signed into law before Canada was a country. Unfortunately, it's one of the first pieces of legislation that Canada actually has, and the law simply places Indigenous peoples below that of anyone else. And so it allows the RCMP, the federal police, to go around, take children from their homes, and put them in custody of the state, who in turn put them in custody of the church, because the church ran these schools. They were funded by the federal government in part, but run with personnel from the church. It was nuns and priests, where children were beaten, they were abused emotionally, sexually. Ultimately, many died from... It is believed the majority of deaths were the result of disease. However, there is no denying that a significant number of deaths, significant being anything more than one, to be perfectly honest with you, came from negligence, physical abuse, and similar circumstances of abuse. And my first point here is going back to the fact that I have no idea why anyone is shocked about any of this. I understand why it's making global news, because Canada's looked at as such a quiet, peaceful country. Like, people have no idea what we did to gain this land. And the fascinating thing is, it appears that most young people don't know either, and then a lot of old people also seem to not know. Now, I don't know. Maybe I'm in a very different position because, I have a very, very strong memory. So it's possible that I just took more in from school than most. And on top of that, my grandfather, I have no Aboriginal, Indigenous, Native American, whatever the term is you want to use, blood in me, at least not that I'm aware of. I'm actually fairly certain that I don't have any, because both my parents have done their ancestry tests. So unless there's a big shocking reveal in my future, I don't have any actual blood in me. However, my grandfather's one of his closest friends growing up was Indigenous. My great grandfather was an RCMP officer who used to work on the reserves and became friends with many of them. He didn't oversee any residential schools or anything like that, but it's something that has been openly discussed in my family forever, like literally as long as I've been alive. It's something that my grandfather and his family was super passionate about: Aboriginal rights, Indigenous rights, and it's something that kind of carried through to me. So you can imagine my surprise when suddenly everyone is talking about residential schools as if no one ever discussed them before, because it's simply not true. I mean, there's a Washington Post piece. It's written by a Canadian, J.J. McCullough. I believe he's from Western Canada. And essentially, as I'm sure you guys know, 751 unmarked graves were found near a residential school in Saskatchewan. And only a few weeks before that, 215 graves were found by a residential school in BC near Kamloops. Now, all of this is shocking in the sense that it happened, right? But it's not shocking in the sense that we found these unmarked graves, because this is something that has been openly discussed, openly criticized in Canada. I mean, literally in Justin Trudeau's first election cycle, he openly discussed this. On this podcast, I've talked many times about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls specifically in Canada and the U.S. This is not something that, when it's brought up, anyone from here has genuinely never heard of. And if you haven't, I'm telling you, it's probably because you didn't pay attention in school. And this is part of the reason why people criticize the way that history is taught all the time, which is apropos. It's completely acceptable to do. I agree that history is not taught correctly. However, you can't, because people are comparing this to the way that slavery is treated in the United States, and that's simply not true, because American history books forever have skipped over the fact of how brutal slavery was to specific people. And that is changing now in some places, but not all. Whereas nationwide here in Canada, it has been widely accepted that the government fucking slaughtered Indigenous people. First, we killed them with disease, then we killed them with blades, then we killed them with alcohol, then we killed them with guns, then we put them in residential schools because there were a few of them still around. That's literally what happened. And it is not hidden at all. And I understand people's fury that these graves have been found. It's a disgusting thing. It should be mentioned that we have no idea if these are the graves of children, although pretty much every expert agrees some significant portion of these graves are Indigenous children. They are unmarked. There's no documentation of them, so they were found with basically ground-penetrating scans. That being said, we shouldn't undersell what's been happening. As I just mentioned, it's correct to be upset by these things, but we have to be realistic in this and turn it into something actionable. So, a ton of people are leaving the Catholic Church. Do you, okay? I walked away almost what year is it? It's, how old am I should say? Actually, yeah, just about a decade ago when I cut ties completely with the Catholic Church. Good for you, I can recommend some books. I would start with The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, and then we can go from there. But all that being said, or The End of Faith, Sam Harris. Actually, I would start with The End of Faith, then The God Delusion, and then we can discuss further reading. Let me know if you need more recommendations on atheism literature, atheist literature. However, I want to note that the people who are outraged by this are the same people who were posting a whole lot about every other social justice issue in the past. And I think it needs to be noted that being upset about this and then and actually doing something and fixing it are two very different things. And a lot of people take out frustrations online. I haven't posted a single thing about this for many reasons. One, I wasn't shocked. Two, I know full well the history here. If you tell me that they found above 8 to 10,000 bodies, that's where I would start being like, really? Seems like a lot. But at this point, I think there's 15 or 1,600 bodies. Yeah, completely believable. No surprise in me whatsoever. It's probably about time that we found them. And, the last residential school closed in 1996, 1997, the winter of 96, really. And that means that it was happening during my lifetime. These schools were still open, right? But I've also known about that my whole life. People are furious about this. Well, then you need to start looking into history and stop waiting for stories to land on your doorstep to be upset about. Because there are things happening right now, which brings me to my point. Because in this Washington Post article, again, this is J.J. McCullough, Canadian journalist writing for the Washington Post. And I'm quickly scrolling through trying to find there it is. So I'm just trying to find the point he made that I've seen all over the place, but this is written well, and I'm going to tear it down in a minute. So he was listing reasons why this is really bad for Canada, and one of his reasons is his fifth reason. He says Quote, fifth are the foreign policy consequences. If a broad and influential segment of Canadian society agrees that Canada has recently perpetrated or is still perpetuating a tremendous crime against humanity, then any act of Canadian diplomacy that presumes the country's moral credibility will be difficult. The People's Republic of China, with whom Canada's relationship has worsened considerably in recent years, is keenly aware of this, bringing up residential schools as a rebuttal to criticism of Beijing's treatment of the Uyghurs. To this, Canada's leaders must respond delicately, lest domestic audiences see them equivocate on their country's defining atrocity, end quote. This is where you and you being JJ who wrote this and every other person posting on Instagram wanting to cancel Canada Day, thinking that this is the end, how can we move forward from this? This is where you're wrong, because nationally, years ago, we paid out monies to the families impacted by this. The Canadian government has taken full responsibility. Fuck the Catholic Church, because they haven't done shit, but there's nothing we can do about that, right? We can leave them, stop sending the money, do all that. That's fine. Or if you're a Catholic, good for you. You want to, whatever. You know, they rape kids, they murder Indigenous people, they killed thousands of people across Europe for 400 years. But if you think they're a group of peace be upon you. Peace be with you, as they say. But moving on from that, this is the way that Canada should embolden their foreign policy, because they are the only wealthy country in the world who owned up to how they fucked up in achieving their status and garnering their land. The only one. And so China can say, oh, look, you had residential schools open in 1997, and Canada can say, that's right, and we closed them. We paid all of the families for the people we fucked up. We stopped killing them. Why are you still killing Muslims, the Uyghur Muslims, in northern China? That's what we can say to them. We have the higher ground here. By admitting that by the nation itself, every single person living here, and the federal government itself, everyone except one politician who no one gives a fuck about, let's be real, has openly said that this was wrong, that it for sure happened. There's no question that it happened, that these bodies, for sure, the majority of them are children who our nation murdered. No doubt. We can move forward on high ground, and we have moral superiority over any other nation who is pretending that they didn't do something similar. You can't point to one single country in existence today, and I should say in the developed world, that didn't absolutely destroy another population to get it. There's not one. And many are continuing to do it today, such as the CCP, the Communist Party of China. Okay? There's no denying this. So why is it that it's a bad thing for this to be found out and popularized? I don't see how. I don't see how this is negative politically to anyone. It's owning up for our mistake. It's literally the most Canadian thing that you can do by openly admitting that this is real. Now, within Canada, yeah, you have Jagmeet Singh of the NDP, who, in my opinion, is blowing it out of proportion. And so he's basically blaming Trudeau for the things his father did, because, of course, Pierre Elliott Trudeau kind of made things worse, signed into law some policies that took away rights of Indigenous peoples, made it a little bit more difficult for them to leave made it easier to leave reserves and more difficult to stay on reserves. Some really nasty things like that. That, again, Trudeau himself has not denied that his father did. He hasn't doubled down on his father's policies there. He's apologized to the Native communities over and over again. And I think, honestly, Jagmeet Singh is grasping at straws because, I mean, the NDP is kind of slipping. They should be doing much better in such a woke society, but the Liberal Party still has the majority, I should say, of the woke crowd. And it's more than enough for them to, like, if there was another election right now, the Liberal Party would sweep it. They're in a very comfortable position. And I think Jagmeet Singh knows this. I shouldn't say he knows this, but the NDP in general know this, and they're trying to capitalize on this specific thing as if by claiming the moral superiority I just referenced, which I'm almost guaranteeing you're going to see Trudeau do internationally. I'm telling you that he can present to the Chinese government how we've corrected this. And this is something that people aren't talking about. We literally paid significant compensation to Indigenous families who were impacted by residential schools. And it's not going to bring back those they've lost. It's not going to bring back the culture that we decimated, but it's the most we can do. Literally the most. People are, it's the least you can do. No, it's literally the most you can do. Now, could we fix the reserves? Absolutely. That's a different conversation. That has nothing to do with residential schools, right? Instead, I think the next step is not only looking into the missing and murdered women and children, but we need to start providing proper supplies, healthcare, water, and food in that order, because supplies would include bottled water to start with, okay, to these reserves. We need to make them habitable. Now, we have already done a lot to make up for how we as a nation fucked up. And now, obviously, this ended in 97. I was born in 94. Most people, maybe you were in your 20s listening to this podcast, just statistically, in 1997, okay? Maybe you were probably 30 or under if you're listening to a podcast in 1997. So, what up, Mom? So, I think that the majority of people alive today, voting today, engaged today, had nothing to do with purporting the existence of residential schools. It's likely that their parents' or grandparents' generation were the ones voting politicians in who supported these sorts of things, if not their great-grandparents. Right? If you're 18 years old right now, this all happened before your life, and you're voting in people and you want no one who supports this. And that's the thing about Canada that I think makes us the best nation in the world. Because not only are we as people able to identify these sorts of problems in our past and speak openly of how disgusting, discriminatory, and murderous that past is, but we can take it a step further, not only apologizing and paying out compensation to those who we in the past, as voters, screwed over. But now we can take it to the rest of the world. While we are fixing the loose ends, because there are always going to be more things that need solving, right? There's, like, we should be tearing down these schools and doing something with those properties to memorialize the individuals whose lives, if not having been lost, were certainly ruined by attending those schools. Well, we can continue to do that while sending out the message of hope that we created here at home to countries like China who are continuing to murder people. And there is no comparison. There really isn't. I'm just going to be honest with you. China has killed more Muslims in the north of their country in the last decade than Jews died in the Holocaust. Okay? Residential schools were horrible. They were a horrible creation. But we did not murder millions of people. And I hate these comparisons because you just have to be real about it. two bad things are not automatically equally bad. They're just not. They are, like, there is no excuse for the existence and continuation up until 96, 97 of residential schools. However, residential schools were not set up inherently as death camps. They could most certainly be referred to as concentration camps, as it was a weird attempt at genocide where the government's idea wasn't to kill them, but to change behaviors and cultures. It's an absolutely terrible, terrible thing. But anytime I hear someone compare that to Nazi death camps and to Chinese concentration camps for Uyghur Muslims, I will look you right in the eye and tell you, you're an idiot. You cannot compare these things. And by what we've done thus far and what we as a nation continue to do, we are positioning ourselves in the moral high ground to stand and face a nation like China in a place like the UN and say, look at how we fixed the problem we identified. We knew it was wrong. Our citizens voted against it. We closed the schools. We funded support for the families affected. And ultimately, we are moving forward, attempting to do as much more as we can to, you can't eliminate, but to minimize the impact of the hurt that we as a nation caused on these people. And we can turn and look at Xi Jinping directly in the eye, every citizen of Canada, and say, why can't you do the same? And we can put pressure on a nation like China to stop murdering people. Stop killing innocent men, women, and children because of their faith, because, well, I mean, it has nothing to do with their skin color. It's because of their faith. That's why they're being murdered. It's very similar to what we were doing, but it's not the same. Either way, we are in a position now better than ever before to stop it. And I think that we all need to start calling on the Canadian government to do so. Because, okay, we have a bad relationship with China. I'm waiting for someone to tell me why that's a bad thing. Honestly, if you live on the same street as a rapist, are you upset that you have a bad relationship with them? No. So is anyone upset that we have a bad relationship with China? Oh, what if the rapist is rich? What if he would bring your kids a lovely birthday present? Would that change your opinion on your relationship with that rapist? I doubt it. So why does it change your opinion on China? Because they can trade with us for cheap. You know, when they steal our designs. There is nothing wrong with having a negative relationship with China. Nothing wrong with it. We shouldn't have a good relationship with them. No one in the West should. No one in the West should at all. And I will stand firm on that ground until China decides to stop murdering innocent people, stop taking over nations like Hong Kong illegally by moving in their legal standards, which we've talked about on this show in the past, illegally taking these places over. We shouldn't have a good relationship with them. You don't get to misbehave and trade with us openly and get freedom for your citizens to just travel at will. I don't think they should. The government needs to fix it. And we need to put all the pressure that we can on the Canadian government to move forward, to teach the Chinese government how to fix this. Because you can't change the past. I mean, you know what I mean? You can't, right? Germany, nowadays, no one looks at Germans and says like, "Oh, fuck you, fuck you. You're a horrible group of people." No, they don't. Because they did as much as they could, and they continue to do as much as they can to fix the problem. Just as we are starting to do now, and have been doing for about a decade. I think it was like, I haven't even looked this up. I remember it, though. It was like 2010 to 2012, that time, when we started paying families for the impact of residential schools, right? This is the sort of thing we need to do. It's the sort of thing we need to support, and it's the sort of thing that we need to export to the world. Right? It's great to be exporting products, music, television, movies. Those are all great things to send to the rest of the world. But you know what's even better? Freedom. Freedom. And that's what we can do by taking what we've learned here at home and teaching individuals around the world, because all of this works from the ground up. If a population sees that you can fix these problems, the government at the top will have to admit it and do so as well. And that's what I urge all individuals here to begin to do. Thank you all so much for tuning in and listening right through to the end of the podcast. As always, you can reach me on social media. It can be found down below. I encourage you to take these conversations with your friends and family in real life or over on social media to continue the conversation. I hope you took something away from this episode. I certainly have been learning a lot recently and sort of developing my foreign policy perspective based on what we've done internally here in Canada. And it's kind of a cool aspect of analyzing politics. So if you enjoyed that, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Let your friends and family know where you listened to this podcast. I hope you all have a fantastic week. It's supposed to be rainy and a little warm here for the rest of the week, so it's going to be enjoyable. My parents gave me their complete Shakespeare collection, so y'all know what I'm doing this week. Having a great time reading Shakespeare. That's not a joke. So either way, everyone keep social distancing, keep washing your hands, keep getting those vaccines, keep on laughing, and keep on learning.